So that now brings us to item 21, the finalised draft Cranford Regeneration Plan. So we've got staff here for this. Thank you. So Richard, welcome back.
Thank you.
Were there any opening remarks that you wanted to make on this report?
Just to update elected representatives that this is for approval to submit the draft regeneration plan to Regenerate Christchurch, so it's not for approval per se. Excuse me. They will need to go through a process of considering it themselves. There may be some changes that they consider are appropriate, and they would more than likely need to circulate those to the other strategic partners for comment, and then they will do a report and make a recommendation to the Minister, and the Minister will make a decision. But in terms of the process, just perhaps a quick overview of that. This is responding to a council resolution stemming from last year's annual plan in relation to which we've referred to in the report. The first step in the process was to prepare a draft outline, which we did. We circulated that to the strategic partners for comments, and that was subsequently approved by council in December of last year and then gazetted by the Minister. Subsequent to that, we prepared a draft regeneration plan which was in accordance with the outline. We notified that for public comments. We received those comments, and now we have the revised draft for you. And as I said earlier on, that is to we are seeking approval to submit that to Regenerate Christchurch for their consideration, not for approval per se. So that's just a bit of an overview of the process. We're happy to take questions in relation to any other matters.
So are there questions? Phil?
Look, I do thank you for all the work that's been done on this. I've asked a few questions as it's gone along, and this question really is in reference to the area where the report refers to a flood management area, but also an area where there's flood ponding management. And I'm just really wondering, and I think the solution that's suggested is that there be infill in that area. So I'm just wondering though, given that there's already a high water table, how in fact infilling that will work?
Right. Okay. There are a number of things I think in answering that question that in the bigger context, which follows on actually from the previous discussion on economic development, funny enough, and that is that this development is based around a low impact urban design philosophy. So it's around water management, and I think happily I'm pleased to say that most urban planning in the city is heading towards that. So that the whole philosophy of developing this area is making groundwater particularly a non-negotiable. So the first thing that the developers and landowners need to do, if this is approved, is to spend a year monitoring groundwater levels. And that is part of preparing a hydrogeological plan. Now that is used to then inform the subdivision consent, and will be part in the way in which the design ends up will be predicated largely on that hydrogeological plan. Now the provisions in the plan are flexible enough, particularly in the outline development plan, to accommodate different housing densities. So I don't think there's any question that at a high level or strategic level that housing is the preferred use here. The two following questions are what density should happen and the scale of development, and then how is that development implemented. So the outline plan identifies some areas which are constrained, and those areas I would anticipate being either quite low density in order to preserve that groundwater, those groundwater systems, or else they'll be probably clustered. But either way, the site coverage of the area I'd anticipate when all that work is done as part of the subdivision consent will be a lot of open ground there, and at that stage, as the plan notes, there will be opportunities to probably acquire through the subdivision process additional linkages, streams, and that final network will be put in place. So from a point of view of high groundwater, yes it is. I mean the whole city's probably saturated at the moment. But that is something which will be managed as part of that subdivision process. So we've got Ian here from a geotechnical perspective, and we've got Graham Harrington from a drainage perspective that certainly may provide an additional assessment on that. But that's the approach that's taken to manage that issue.
Thank you, Ivan. And I guess though my other concern too is that in 4.9 it's quite clearly stated, and it's good that you have, is that the land drainage system can cope with all but the most extreme storm events. And I have to say I have some concerns about that. And are you really saying, look, further technical work may find a way to actually resolve those concerns?
Well, perhaps I'll get Graham to actually address that if he could. But around the Cranford Basin, I mean, it depends on the extent of the storm event. But if Graham could actually just elaborate on that for us.
Perhaps just before we jump into that, though, I think we need to bear this process or what you have in front of you in context. So what it is in essence is a proposal to change both the regional policy statement and the district plan. So the degree of assessments we've done at this stage are at that level. We don't know what people are going to build there yet. We know the areas they're going to build, but we don't know quite exactly what it's going to look like. So there's always a further degree of analysis that will come at the resource consent and the subdivision stage, and that's natural, that's anticipated. So this is a normal part of the process where you go through a pretty thorough assessment at the kind of plan change stage, and then there will be further assessment when the applicants come in for the subdivision and land use consent. So there will need to be further analysis at that stage, and that is normal. That is part of what happens as part of any process akin to this. But I'll leave it up to Graham to speak to that.
Okay, there's not a lot to say. The city itself in vast areas is subject to flooding in extreme flood events. And the area that has been rezoned here, or planned to be rezoned, is no worse really than an awful lot of the rest of the city. So we do get flooding and extreme flood events in large parts of the city. And when talking about extreme flood events, we're talking about events, in this particular instance anyway, of the order of at least 1 in 50-year event, or perhaps a 1 in 200-year event. So that's extreme.
Thanks, Graham.
Great, thank you. Yanni.
I was just wanting to put some wording in around a requirement for a percentage to be affordable housing. So what's the best way of doing that?
I think from the outset we should acknowledge, unless there is intervention by a social housing agency or something along those lines, that the housing, much of the housing here won't be cheap, if you like, because of the development costs. But my understanding is that because of the range of housing that's going to be provided and the exemplar standards that are imposed, we will still get a starting point of around 500,000. Now that's anecdotal, and that is over in the Croziers Road area, 500 to 550,000. Now that's not necessarily affordable housing, but anything less than that is going to require, I think, more direct intervention than relying on a private developer to provide it.
So my understanding is through the changes, we can do development agreements with developers, given that the developers of this land, I presume, or the owners are going to experience a significant increase in value if the rezoning goes ahead. Surely it would be fair to expect that something goes back to the community through the provision of some affordable housing, given that that's one of the key objectives.
Okay, so what's recommended in the plan is a memorandum of understanding. Now, at the moment, that is around expediting development rather than other private development agreements. Other than that, I am unclear how we can actually negotiate that, but that might be one mechanism to do it. It would be some sort of agreement of exclusionary zoning or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But it hasn't been provided for in the plan to date.
And I think given where we're at in the process, you know, today what we're doing is approving the regeneration plan for submission to Regenerate Christchurch. If there was a desire to do what Yanni's suggesting, is this the point in the process where we would do that, or is there another point in the process where that would become a relevant discussion to have?
I think it's getting very late in the process to be addressing that issue.
Sorry, can I just be clear? There was a submission related to affordable housing. So are we able to respond as councillors to the submissions, or is that for someone else?
Staff officers have considered all the submissions and presented a revised report to you which addresses the issues, comments on the issues themselves, and makes changes to the draft regeneration plan itself. I think the key point that Ivan's emphasised is that this is tricky land to develop. It's going to cost money to get it out of the ground, and the likelihood of getting affordable housing out of there is slim. That's it in a nutshell. Unless you've got someone who wants to intervene to do that. So it wouldn't be our advice to you that we put something in there in relation to affordable housing, because I think that would be tricky to deliver.
Sorry, can I just ask a supplementary? And that is, has there been any work done around what the increase in value will be if the rezoning goes through of this land?
Not in terms of what's the word, net profits or any of those things. That will vary right across, I imagine it will vary across the whole development area. There may well be some areas which will be higher than others, but I can't comment on that. We haven't done those sorts of valuations.
But it would be pretty significant, is it fair to say?
Well, if the work hasn't been done, it's probably not fair to ask staff to comment.
Yeah. It may in some areas, it may not be others. I don't know.
Right.
Thank you. Glenn.
Thank you. My question's around the current situation with Ngaitahu. The report talks about the fact that it's still unresolved. So I know that the council may have agreed some months ago or a year ago to go with this, but subsequent reports have revealed more information, and the status at the moment is that there are ongoing discussions. So we don't have resolution around that yet. We're a partner with them, with the various runanga, etc. I'm just trying to reconcile how that works. How do we actually go ahead if we're a partner without them?
Well, we've always, officers have had the view that there is a potential solution, but we are unable to put that forward because we don't have control over that solution. Or there are possible solutions, but they're not part of this plan. They lie somewhere else.
So we've put in supporting commitment into the document, if it is to be approved, which talks about investigating those potential solutions, which is essentially the existing discharge of the Upper Dudley Creek diversion into Horseshoe Lake and its location, which is the greatest concern to Ngaitahu. But that sits, that decision is really a decision that needs to be made out of both the stormwater discharge permit, correct me again Graham, I probably haven't got the terminology right, the Otakara Avon River Corridor Regeneration Plan, and it needs to be an LTP decision for this council. So the best we can do is really indicate that that is certainly something that is worthy of investigation, and indeed staff do consider it is, but it's not something that this process has control over.
Okay, thank you. And I just had a different question just over the current shovel-ready sections that we have in the whole city at the moment. So we know we have an excess supply of greenfields. Have you got a current figure, just approximately, on that? I was trying to remember myself.
I don't know. I might remember the number. The number's pretty big. I guess the benefit of this site is that while it's technically greenfield, it really is infill. It's in close proximity to existing KAC, it's in close proximity to good transport routes, rather than expand on the outer fringes of Christchurch, we see this as an opportunity to use the existing urban area more efficiently.
Thank you. Pauline.
Thank you. Well, funnily enough, one of my questions was going to be that do you think that there's a possibility that the costs of actually getting any of these future houses consented in the whole project could actually outweigh the viability of building in there? As sort of an opposite question to Yanni's, because it seems to me there's so many challenges in here for a developer to overcome, it could actually become almost prohibitive. But that's not for us to decide now, but do you have a feeling on that?
There is as I said before, the quality of the land varies across this whole development area. I think the indications we've had from the landowners is that the land which is easier to develop, they are very keen to start. So that can only indicate to me they see that there is it's feasible. The other land which is going to be constrained, I really can't comment, but I know that the price that they're getting for large sections around that area is quite high. I've heard of one section going for about $500,000 plus for a half-acre piece of dirt down there, and so that would seem to me that they are viable.
Right, and I think the aim here is to make sure that these are exemplar properties,
yes,
so they'll be in the totally opposite to affordable. They'll be in the upper bracket, and they'll have to be viable. But my concern really in this is potential future costs to council. So we've seen a Dudley diversion that went through in 1979, we've seen another one in 89, and now we've seen a $48 million one going through in 2017. Considering climate change and increased storm surges and storm events, could there be a likelihood that we'll be called to put in yet another diversion through at possibly, multi-million-dollar costs in another 10 or 15 years?
Again, I think that's
and would we would pick up the tab for that?
I'll leave the technical answer to Graham about the diversion, but I think there's a couple of broader issues to consider. In terms of council's role in enabling land supply, look, if we are still a high growth area, yes, we do have a lot of land around which is potentially ready for development, but we are one of the high growth areas across the country. If you don't go here or go in the central city, you'll go out at the edges of the city, and there's always costs with that. As we know, one of the reasons why we're trying to encourage intensification is because generally the infrastructure costs are less than what you face with greenfield sites. So is the land tricky? Yes, it is. There's no getting away from that, but it's not if the land's tricky here, it doesn't mean you need to do something somewhere else. So there's always a comparison there. The other issue to note is that there will be development contributions associated with this. Now that'll depend on the yield of the number of sections that come out of it, and the residential new neighbourhood zone is quite enabling in that regard. So we don't have an overall number to say this is what it will be, but if you assume there's going to be 300 to 400 at circa 30k a section, it's quite a reasonable amount of return to council in relation to development contributions to pay for infrastructure that will be required to enable this development to occur. So that's just a broad overview.
I think you're comparing apples with eggs there, because the thing is, this is a very challenging area, and the potential for having to put in yet another mitigation in the form of some sort of diversion could well be on the cards in the future, but so long as that's all taken into account with Regen, I think.
I'll let Graham speak to the discharge issue.
Okay, just immediately downstream of this proposed rezoning is a very large retention area, the Cranford Basin, and that and on-site retention and so on can very adequately deal with any results of flooding and stormwater management as a result of this particular rezoning. So in terms of this particular site, I don't see it triggering any other major infrastructure requirements. from stormwater. That's not to say that there won't be major infrastructure requirements somewhere else in the city, not associated with this particular rezoning.
And the other thing regarding Ngāi Tahu, so could they actually hold up this process by requesting that we address the current outlet into Horseshoe Lake before this goes ahead, thereby also costing us quite a lot of money?
Well, if council approves to submit it to Regenerate Christchurch today, that'll be for Regenerate Christchurch to make a recommendation to the Minister as to whether they want to approve it as it currently stands or go back to Ngāi Tahu. So if they were of a mind to raise that issue, it would come back to us for some further input.
So no one's going to stitch us up to actually have to do that, is what I'm asking.
Well, what we've said in our draft regeneration plan is that we would investigate the possibility of the issue that Ngāi Tahu's raised, but we can't do it as part of this process itself. It is subject to alternative processes such as the Otakara Avon River Corridor regeneration plan.
But in this process it may expedite that, using that word again, Dion, you know what I mean? So all I'm trying to do is ascertain the potential for, costs to the ratepayer because of this, and to protect ourselves from that. And the other issues too that the community's brought up is, traffic and amenity. There's a huge traffic impact there. We've got the cycleway down Grasmere Street, and I'm wondering if that may have been the preferred route had the team known about this going ahead, because we've already got issues at Grasmere and the main North Road. And if that's the only way that can get out, well, that's going to be huge issues too. So any costs there would be picked up by who? The council or the developers?
I'll let Graham respond to your earlier one, and then I'm happy to respond to the cycle one.
Yeah, in terms of the issues discussed with Ngāi Tahu, should it transpire that we alter the water outlet from Daly Creek diversion and spend money there in terms of treatment of the stormwater and so on, that would mean that we could probably defer works of a similar nature in Cranford Basin, because you would be actually treating the same water. So you would be able to transfer some of the costs that you might spend in Cranford Basin down further into the red zone rather than spend it there. So,
in terms of the cycleway, I think it's a real benefit that we're looking to, intensify an area which is adjacent to a cycleway. That's the whole reason why we put the cycleways in and make them accessible to everyone. So the fact that we're looking for a medium density development adjacent to one of our key transport nodes is ideal to my mind, because people can jump on the bus which goes down Main North Road, or jump on the cycleway to take them into town. So they've got better transport accessibility than a lot of other areas around town.
Yeah, the only thing is there'll be more,
cars going across it,
accessing the driveways and things like that. And just one last quick question, if I may. How many property owners are in that area at the moment? I just noticed there were 64 submissions in support, so I was wondering how many of the supporting submissions were from the actual...
7 or 8, I think. There were 2 in one block and about 7, I think, if I remember, in the other, give or take.
In the Grasmere block. 7 in the Grasmere block and a couple in Case Croziers.
So about 9 or 10.
Roughly, yeah.
Out of 64.
Sounds like it's about that many.
Right. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, so do we have a mover for the recommendation? Mike? Seconded Dave? Any debate? Yanni?
Just want to propose an amendment.
Okay.
And again, I'm a little bit confused about, normally with a district plan there'd be a hearings panel, there'd be chances to make changes by that hearings panel. This is what we've been told is just staff recommendations in response to submissions. So I just want to check that we're okay to make amendments. That's fine?
So in terms of the regeneration plan process, what you're proposing, is what you're proposing, Yanni, going to be an amendment to the content of the plan?
Yeah, in response to the submissions around affordable housing.
So can we get some advice from staff on how that sits in terms of the regeneration planning process?
So the Regeneration Act in itself is reasonably enabling, but what it does direct council to do is prepare an outline. So the outline therefore takes that a step further and articulates the process. What we proposed was to do public consultation, which we did. We did offer those people who provided feedback to council an opportunity to come and speak to staff and an independent planning consultant. No one took that up. So, and we did provide them with a revised proposal, which we felt best addressed all the comments that we received. So that was the process that was outlined in the outline itself, and we've got an obligation, a legal obligation, to follow that and make sure we're consistent with it.
So if an amendment were to be moved and were to pass today, how would that sit within that process? Does that present an issue, or is it? Can it be part of the process?
I might seek some legal advice on this one, but it would depend on what the amendment was. The process is set out in the outline, and we're obligated to follow that process. Yep. So if the amendment is to the regeneration plan itself, that's something different to changing the process that we've followed. But perhaps Brent can.
All right, or would it be helpful to get the wording of the amendment before we get the advice?
We can give general advice at this stage, sir. An amendment can be made. And the reason I say that is that the decision being made by the council today is whether to submit and what to submit to Regenerate Christchurch for a draft regeneration plan. So there are two questions: what to submit and whether to submit. So the amendment being discussed is about what to submit.
Yep.
Staff have drafted a draft regeneration plan which went out for community comment. Staff then made some changes to that plan following getting that community comment. It's for the council to decide whether it wants to submit that document, that draft, or a very draft to Regenerate Christchurch.
Right, thank you. So let's get some wording for the amendments, and Yanni, you're obviously going to move that, and we'll need to get a seconder for that, and then we can debate it.
Yeah, I'll move that. The council ask that the regeneration plan include an amendment to, as part of the negotiated, was it a development agreement or MOU? MOU with the developers, a set percentage to be directed to affordable housing.
So did you capture that wording?
In the well, we can either in the form of land or cash. Or buildings, as they do in Queensland.
Is there a question to us?
Sorry, was that a question?
Oh, no, it's just, so the concept is that as part of the development agreement MOU, a bit like we did with Ngāi Tahu, with Preston's, we had a set figure and we had a set time frame. So I would see no reason why this couldn't be something that we submit to Regen Christchurch, that we would see that as being a requirement.
Oh, that is the intent of the MOU, and that is to make, and Regenerate Christchurch expects us to do this, to do our best to try and expedite development and to get a certain amount of development done by a certain time, and that's what the MOU is seeking to do.
No, I want it more explicit, that noting the value increase, that and the submissions and requesting affordable housing,
right,
that a set percentage of the development be made available for affordable housing.
Okay, so the wording of the amendment, what we've got here is that the council requests that the regeneration plan include a set percentage of affordable housing in the development. Is that the amendment, Yanni, that you want to move?
Yeah, set percentage. Yeah, it could be all cash or land.
Is that legal?
I don't know if we can do cash.
No, so that'd be a development contribution then.
So can we agree to the wording that we want this amendment to be, first of all?
I think one of the things Yanni was keen to clarify is if the land goes up, say, 10 times the value, is there any component of that value that the council could take for the community to put into affordable housing in any way, shape or form?
There are options for trying to draft provisions that would go into a memorandum of understanding. There's already been a proposal in the draft regeneration plan for Cranford that there is a memorandum of understanding that the council attempts to enter into with developers. So something along these lines could be added to it. We'd need to do a little bit of work on the precise drafting of it. The resolution in front of the council today seeks support from memory to the general form of the document that's in front of the council, but with further changes that could be made by the Chief Executive. So if you wish to word a resolution in general terms around there being an addition to the Memorandum of Understanding, that would provide for affordable housing in some form.
I think Council Code has a suggestion around affordable, but...
No, can I just add one proviso to that? As Richard highlighted a moment ago, the first stage in the development of a draft regeneration plan is preparation of an outline. And that outline was prepared last year and the council approved it in December of last year. There's a requirement in the Act that the final form of the regeneration plan has to be consistent with the outline. So I'm simply flagging that as a possible issue if this resolution is made.
No, don't worry, don't go there. Go with what he's suggesting.
Okay, so Yanni, what do you want to do? So you're comfortable with the wording that's in front of us?
Affordable housing in the development as negotiated through the MOU.
Yes.
Can I just suggest you go with Brent's suggestion that it's slightly vaguer, that it allows for the Memorandum of Understanding to include a percentage of the uplift to be used for affordable housing either here or elsewhere by the council.
Sure.
Is that what you were saying, Brent?
Yes, it is. Yes, so something generally worded along those lines.
I'm happy to take the advice of the appropriate wording. I don't want to derail and have an illegal amendment or an amendment that can be challenged, but yeah, I'm happy to go with the staff advice on the best form of achieving that outcome.
Yep, okay, so the wording of the amendment then based on that advice is what?
Get Brent to word it.
Mr Chair, I do have a few concerns. Just that, as Brent mentioned earlier on, the outline doesn't include any reference to affordable housing. The draft outline development plan, which forms the part of the regeneration plan, doesn't have any reference to that. So the difficulty I see by including it within and the outline development plan is what gets included within the district plan. So the difficulty with including it in the regeneration plan itself is one, the consistency issue that Brent alluded to, but also I think there's an issue of the challenge with developing the site will make it difficult to achieve that additional resolution.
Okay, so that's advice that we would take into account in considering this amendment which has been put forward. Are we hearing advice that there's some risk? So there may be some difficulty in carrying out the thing that the amendment envisages. There might be some practical economic development economics barrier to achieving that. but are we hearing anything that, are we getting any advice that's telling us that we, as a matter of process, shouldn't be considering an amendment that looks like this?
In my view, you're not getting that advice.
Okay.
The advice is you can consider making an amendment like this.
Yep.
In doing so, you're aware of the risks. The risks being the possibility that Regenerate Christchurch are not supportive of that addition for whatever reason,
Yep.
and the other risk being the practicality of implementation.
Yeah, okay, so that's advice that we're receiving on this now.
Yes.
We're also in a position where we've been going for almost 3 hours. I had indicated we would take a lunch break at 1 o'clock, and it's now 2 minutes past, 3 minutes past, in fact. We can keep going, or my suggestion actually would be that we adjourn this matter and reconvene at 2 o'clock to do the Yaldhurst subdivision piece, which we'd committed that we would do at 2 o'clock, and then come back and complete this as the last item on the open agenda after that, which, leaving this hanging at this point isn't ideal, but we had said that we would take a lunch break at 1, and we have committed that we will be back at 2 to do Yaldhurst. So rather than moving an amendment, rather than moving that we go outside of standing orders and continue beyond 105, what I would suggest is that we adjourn until 2 o'clock, at which point we'll come back and we will do Yaldhurst, and then we'll pick this back up again. And if there was any discussion required by staff around how this might sit and any further advice you want to bring us, that might be an appropriate opportunity for that to occur as well. All right, so we'll adjourn until 2 o'clock. We'll be back in open agenda at 2 to do Yaldhurst, and then we'll complete this matter, and at that point we'll go into public exclusion. And item